All right. For those of you tuning in live, we have a special guest on the show, Mr. Steve Patrick. So, Steve, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, well, I'm excited because when Miller and I decided to start Limitless, which at the time was called Roofing Mastery, we started the podcast, and you were one of the first guys that we had the opportunity to interview. And since then, coming to the industry from the outside, I've just only seen how impactful and how valuable level the playing field is. And it's just awesome to be able to make friends in this space with people like you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Very kind.
So, the topic of today's discussion is three critical truths about overhead and profit. And I really can't think of many people better qualified to discuss this topic than you. But before we get into all that, for people that are not familiar with level the playing field, just give a little bit of background about yourself. Who is Steve Patrick, and what is level the playing field?
Well, my mentor in the claims adjusting business, Tony Rugas, and I started Level the Playing Field several years back. My sister is also a business partner, Deborah, and so Level the Playing Field. It started out as we started out doing appraisals, and then we started doing trainings. Um, Now we have estimate writing, estimates made easy. We have contractor products. We're partners with the Commercial Roofing Academy, and we're about to have an online library of trainings that people can access and watch anytime they want, with some of the best in the country. So, yep.
Man, that's great. And I love the Facebook group because somebody posts a question or a challenge having to deal with a claim or an insurance related issue with a job, and they can get hundreds of comments and not just trash either. I mean, they can get very insightful comments about how to tackle their issues. So I'm sure you guys had no idea the Facebook group would blow up the way it has.
It's funny. So I wish I could remember who suggested that we do a Facebook group. Um, Someone suggested it. I didn't even know what a Facebook group was. I said, well, what's a Facebook group? And so I told Tony, hey, we can do this Facebook group. And he said, well, what's a Facebook group? I mean, we didn't even know what we were doing. I mean, to be perfectly candid with you, I said, since we're in Dallas with the North Texas Roofing Contractors Association, I said, I'll bet we can have 100 people join if we don't screw this up. And we're about to go 16,000 people probably in about a week. So talk about exceeding our expectations. It's just been nuts. It's got a whole life of its own.
And so how long ago was that? How long has the Facebook group been active?
I think 5 or 6 years, something like that. I'd have to look it up. I can't remember. Like 5 years or something like that.
Wow. That's wild, man. Well, digging into what we're going to talk about today, knowing what you know, working with the clients you've worked with, and just your time in the industry, we're going to knock down these three critical truths. Really, it's going to come from the opposite side, which is what are the three biggest challenges that you see contractors facing over and over and over again with insurance companies. And then we can go to the truth of that and really how they can deal with that. But before we get into that, what I'd love to hear, like, what's the most frustrating thing that you see happening over and over again when it comes to insurance claims and contractors?
The claims adjusters are ignorant. They have no idea what they're talking about. They hire people. Maybe they were working 3 weeks ago at Subway, and now they're a claims adjuster, or maybe they're not even a claims adjuster. Maybe they're just another voice on the end of the phone, and they have no idea what overhead and profit is. And it's unfortunate that, number one, that our industry still to this day doesn't know what overhead and profit is. If they did, they wouldn't be arguing complexity. The insurance company says this isn't complex enough. It's an irrelevant position for them to hold. Um, so that's the number one thing. Is and our industry isn't any better unless you've gone to one of my classes or listened to me talk. Um, our industry thinks overhead and profit should be separated out from our price, which is absurd. No company and no industry in the entire United States does that. I happen to be sitting in the parking lot of Costco, and you go into Costco here, they don't have a price plus overhead and profit. Like, they sell big screen TVs. It doesn't say $1,200 plus overhead and profit of $300. It just says $1,500. And so why, if no one in the entire United States separates out their overhead and their profit, why do we do that? Why do we play the insurance company's game and separate it out? It's absurd. No one should ever separate out overhead nor profit from their price. It's all built in, just like everyone else.
Yeah, it's pretty
including
weird.
The insurance company. The insurance company's price, they don't separate out their overhead and show that as a distinct separate line item. They don't separate out their profit to show that as a distinct separate line item on their insurance premiums. So if they don't do it, why do we? That's the reason why lump sum pricing is so important, because that's what everyone does. Lump sum prices.
Yeah, it's really weird, coming to the world of general contracting and roofing from the outside. Issues like that are difficult to understand. And I guess now that we're here with this type of estimate, doing everything through Xactimate and waiting for the insurance company to approve things, really just doing it backwards. It's going to take a lot of people doing the same thing, coming together with one voice to make a shift in that area. So let's get into it then. What do you think is one of the biggest challenges, one of the biggest problems that you see over and over again that is just a part of the way contractors do business, or maybe a part of the way the insurance companies respond? What's one of the biggest out of the three challenges that people face? And then let's get into the truth that people need to hear and how they can respond.
Well, the first thing you need to do, and I teach this in all my classes, is stop making statements and ask questions. Ask the adjuster questions. If you're making statements, yes, this is complex because of this is complex because of that, not only are you playing in their playing field, but you're making statements. Everything, 90% of all the conversations that you have with an adjuster should be in the form of questions, asking them questions. So when they say, so what does complexity have to do with that? How did you arrive at the conclusion that complexity has anything whatsoever to do with overhead and profit? I mean, what's it have to do with, let's just go with profit. One of the biggest problems you have as consumers, when you say overhead and profit, since they're not familiar with the word overhead, it's an accounting term. And unless you're an accountant, you're not familiar with the term overhead, as in general overhead. And so when they hear overhead and profit, their mind is thinking, what's overhead? And they don't even hear the profit part. Most everyone knows what a profit is. Companies have to make a profit to stay in business, right? But they don't know what the word overhead means. And so that's one of the biggest problems, is consumers haven't got a clue what the insurance company is talking about and what we're talking about if we go down the rabbit trail that the insurance company is trying to get everybody to go down.
So if the insured doesn't,
the term overhead and profit means, and I was having breakfast with the pit bull attorney that works for all the insurance companies. Everyone knows his name. Since it was a private discussion, I won't mention his name, but everyone knows who he is. And we were having breakfast here in Dallas, and I asked him 5 questions about overhead and profit, and he was unable to answer the questions. So he literally took the Fifth Amendment in our private conversation on all 5 of the questions. By taking the Fifth Amendment, what I mean is, what he said was point made, point made, point made, point made, point made on all 5 of my questions. He wouldn't answer the questions because he knew that I was right, and he knew the insurance industry was wrong. And so if the pit bull attorney that works for all the insurance companies can't answer those questions, surely the adjuster can't. And then what it does is, these 5 questions, what it does is it makes them realize that their entire position on overhead and profit is irrational and illegitimate. And so there you go.
So, and I know this is stuff that you teach, the 5 questions and stuff like that. So I know you don't want to share all of those, but what's a really good question that somebody could ask, and who should they ask? I mean, we all know the field adjuster doesn't hold any sway over how things go. So how do you get I'm assuming you're trying to really ultimately ask this question of the desk adjuster if they start to deny coverage on items.
Yeah, if you're talking with someone who doesn't have the authority to say yes, you're wasting your time. I don't know about you, but I don't have time to waste. So you start off with, if I happen to have something on my estimate that's outside the realm of your authority, I apologize in advance. I don't always know where every adjuster's level of authority is. And, I don't have unlimited authority at my company either. So if I happen to ask for something that's outside your area of authority, just simply say, let's go to the next thing on the list. And if you put it that way, it makes it easy for the adjuster to just say, well, let's just go to the next thing on the list. And they can save face without it looking like, I don't have the authority in my company to say yes to things. You don't want to put somebody on to make them lose face like that.
No, that's good. I like that.
It makes it easy for them to say, well, let's just go to the next thing on the list. And as you're going down your estimate, and then you could just circle the line items that they don't have the authority, and now you know what line items to take to the supervisor. All the things circled on your estimate that they said, let's go to the next thing on the list. And of course, overhead and profit's probably going to be one of those things. So on the list of things that they don't have the authority to say yes to, and the overhead and profit, you simply go up the chain of authority in the claims department, trying to find someone who can be reasoned with. And if no one can be reasoned with, your client has been backed into a corner and they only have 6 options. They can do nothing, which isn't much of an option, but they can do that. They can take it on the chin, and they can pay the contractor out of pocket the amount that they're leaving off the estimate. The client could hire a contractor to do substandard construction for the carrier's scope. They can go to court, either small claims court or lawyer up. For big court, they can hire a public adjuster, or they can go to appraisal. Those are the consumer's 6 options, and there isn't a 7th one. It's important that you learn and memorize those 6 options so you can explain them to the consumer so they understand what their options are, and then they can decide what they want to do.
Well, I like the way you describe that, because you're really talking about tactics. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can ask the same question and try to negotiate or use leverage with an insurance adjuster. But what you're describing is a respectful way to approach somebody so that you're getting around them if you need to, but you're not doing it in a way that offends them and burns a bridge. And I really like that. And I think that really speaks more to your own core values and just the kind of guy you are, that you would develop a method like that. But I really like that, because as soon as there's a verse in the Bible that says a brother offended is harder to be won than a strong city. Offend somebody, and it's more difficult to get them to work with you than it is to overtake an entire fortified city. And so I really like that, because you're going in a way that's respectful. You're not going to offend them. You're not going to talk down to them. We all know what it's like when somebody starts treating us like we're an obstacle or a problem, and they have no regard for the way they're acting toward us. So I really like that. So
we want to stay professional. Yeah, we want to stay professional. You never know when you're going to meet this adjuster again. And then if you act like a jerk and you walk up on another claim that he's at and he just rolls his eyes, and you're not going to get anything that you ask for or that you say that you're charging, because you were a jerk. It doesn't work. If the adjuster's being a jerk to you, do they persuade you? Of course not. So what makes us think that us being jerks with them is going to persuade them? It's absurd.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. And so when guys ask these questions and they're trying to, hey, let's deal with the stuff that we agree on, let's get that out of the way, and then the other stuff, let's take it to the next level. And we're going for overhead and profit. If it's just outside the house and we're just doing the roof, which is what a lot of these adjusters say. It's just the roof. It's not complicated. There's not a lot of management going on, even though we may have to involve an AC guy. We may have to involve a sheet metal guy. We may have to involve, obviously, the roofers. We may have to involve a window guy if there's window damage. We all know it's more complex than is typically expressed by the carrier. What's the next biggest challenge you see to guys securing overhead and profit? We know most guys are not asking the right questions. They're not approaching it the right way. What's the next biggest challenge that's blocking guys from getting overhead and profit on a roofing job?
Playing the insurance company's game and thinking the complexity has anything to do with it whatsoever. So when the insurance companies build in their general overhead, their cost of doing business into their price, or build in a profit, are they doing so because their policy is complex? I mean, their policy is complex, but is that why they're passing along their overhead costs and charging a profit? Because their product is complex. Is that why they're doing it? No, because if they don't pass along their overhead costs, they're out of business. And if they don't charge a profit, they're out of business. So complexity has nothing to do with it. Don't even argue complexity. You're playing on the insurance company's playing field. They have the home field advantage. Why would you play on their playing field? Giving them the home field advantage. And when you start arguing complexity, what you're doing, you're saying that complexity is a valid argument. And it's not a valid argument. Complexity has nothing to do with it. The insurance company acts as if, so you have the estimate for all the line items and the sales tax, and like overhead and profit is like we're giving you overhead and profit, like as if you're at a restaurant and they're giving you the dessert for free. Overhead and profit is not dessert. It's meat and potatoes. And it's not free. The consumer prepaid for it with their insurance premiums.
Okay, so
just like sales tax. Imagine them saying this loss isn't complex enough for the consumer to qualify for sales tax. How absurd would that be? It's the exact same thing. The consumer doesn't have to qualify for overhead and profit. They've prepaid for it.
Right. Yeah, it makes perfect sense to me. So how do guys do that though? So the biggest critical truth is that guys need to start, guys and gals running these general contracting roofing companies, they need to approach by asking questions, asking the right questions and doing it in a manner that's respectful and professional. The second big thing is change the playing field and quit playing their game. So how do you reestablish that playing field? Because we all know that they're saying send the Xactimate, and then they try to poke holes through multiple items. They also, don't put items in correctly or with the right amounts. So how do you reestablish that playing field?
Simple, by doing a lump sum estimate. That's what the insurance companies do with their insurance premiums. So they say we're covering, like say on a residential loss, we're covering the dwelling, we're covering other structures, we're covering contents, we're covering additional living expenses. On a homeowner's policy, they also cover liability claims. If someone is suing a homeowner for someone's got property damage or bodily injury or something like that, and the homeowner's policy covers medical payments in case someone is, an ambulance or whatever, has bodily injury. So those 6 coverages are built into the homeowner's policy. And so likewise, so they have a scope of coverage, those 6 things on a homeowner's policy. And then they give you the insurance premium. They don't break out their general overhead. They don't break out their profit. Imagine if the insurance company was to break out their profit as a separate line item. The consumer would be appalled at how much profit that the insurance company is building into their product. So they give a lump sum price for their work. They give a scope of what's covered, those 6 coverages and policy limits, and then they say, here's our price. So we do the exact same thing. So we only use Xactimate for one thing, to create a spec sheet, a specification sheet. And you do that by using Xactimate the way you ordinarily would. But what you don't do is you don't use Xactimate pricing. You just print a scope report in Xactimate, and that's your spec sheet. And then when it comes to your price, it's simple. Add up all your hard costs, including the salesman's commission, every single cost that's going into the Jones job, and then add in your profit margin, whatever it is that you need to have. A minimum, never have less than a 20% true net profit. And that's your price. You add up all your costs, add in your risk, add in your profit, and that's your lump sum price. By the way, that's exactly what the insurance companies do. That's how they arrive at their price. They add up all their hard costs, add in the amount of risk that they're taking on, add in their profit, and that's the price they charge for their insurance premium. We're doing the exact same thing they do. How can they argue that what we're doing is invalid when we're doing the exact same thing the insurance companies do?
Right. It makes sense. But let's just address what I think maybe in the minds of a lot of people listening to this or watching this. They may be thinking, you know what, that sounds great. Let's say I put my lump sum contract together. I've got my spec sheet. I send in my lump sum contract. You're right. My overhead's way more than they think it is. So I add that. Then I add my profit margin. And the insurance company says, what is this? And you say, that's my estimate.
My price.
Right.
And
then they say,
so here's my
send
scope
us
of
a
work,
full,
and here's my price.
and then they come back and say, well, then, okay, that's great. Send us a full Xactimate.
That's not how I arrived at my price. You're asking for something that doesn't exist. I didn't arrive at my price at looking at Xactimate. I arrived at my price exactly the same way that you do. I added up all my costs and added in my profit margin. So you're asking for something, you might as well ask for a rainbow zebra. It doesn't exist. I don't use Xactimate to arrive at my price. So you're asking for something that doesn't exist. I can't give you something that doesn't exist.
So how often when you guys teach this and you teach lump sum contracts that I know, I mean, I personally know several guys that are doing this and doing it well. And I know one guy in particular that's very high volume that does this with every single job. And the insurance company has stopped arguing with his company and they pay out what they ask for. So I know it works. But for how many guys do you teach this to? And it's just like, I've never done it this way. Is this even going to work? I mean, is it pretty typical for people to be kind of shocked by this method?
Yes. And it's so obvious. How do you think the contractors arrived at how do they create a specification sheet and arrive at a price before software? How did they do that? How did the insurance adjusters back in the day before software arrive at a price? They did the exact same thing. They added up all the costs, like all the subcontractor costs, add in your general overhead, add in your salesman's commissions, the sales tax, and the profit, and they arrive at the price. This is the way it's been done for over a century. In fact, 4 centuries. So this isn't something new. Actually, what it is something old. It's the exact same thing that the adjusters did back before software. So who says that we have to use software to arrive at our price? In fact, why would any sane person allow some third party like Xactimate to dictate the price that they do their work for? Are we some public utility where we're regulated and someone else determines the price that we do our work for? It's absurd. Why would any rational person allow some third party to dictate the price that they do their work for?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
No sane person would do that.
We're working on a job.
The problem is the contractors have never thought about these questions.
Yeah, it's crazy. We're working on a job right now that's almost. We're working on a job right now in Dallas that involves water mitigation and build back, and it's just a lot of work had to be done on 3 very large apartment complexes. And our total bill just for WaterMid alone is just under $2 million. And so the insurance company, of course, asked for Xactimate. Well, they got about 190-page Xactimate file for just one of the properties. And then they are using a, it looks like we lost Steve there for a minute. Let's see if I can get him back real quick. Hang with us, guys, just for a minute. Yes, I know Steve's driving in his truck, so we'll see if we can get him back real quick. Well, what I was going to say, I'll give Steve a minute to get back, but one thing that I found out by talking with folks in the industry is that we're dealing with a water mitigation job, and of course, there's overhead and profit on it. And it's with a job that's almost $2 million, obviously the overhead and profits is significant. And so they asked us to put together a Xactimate, which we did. Then they asked for more documents, which we sent. We've done everything they've asked. And then they sent that out to, not only do they have multiple adjusters on the job, which makes things confusing. Hey, Steve, we got you back. What I was basically just describing is a job we're on, almost $2 million in WaterMid, and they've asked for Xactimate files. They've asked for all kinds of other stuff. Then they sent it out to a third party named Sedgwick, which basically does an audit of everything we sent to the insurance company. Well, lo and behold, of course, Xactimate's owned by Xactware, and I can't even keep track of who owns what, but basically the same company, the mother company that owns Xactware and Xactimate also owns Sedgwick. So
can you say conflict of interest?
Yeah, I mean, you want to talk about a massive conflict of interest. So the same company that's really determining how pricing is done is also in bed with the company that the insurance company is using to determine whether that's fair or not. And the contractor, us, we're waiting to see who makes the final verdict. So, of course, you know, one of the sponsors on our show is Daly and Black. So I called Daly and Black up and talked to London for a little bit. And of course, you know, Daly and Black is the attorney we recommend to call when the insurance company delays or denies coverage. So I call London Black because I know I'm going to get an 800-pound gorilla in the room if I need to with Daly and Black. And London's advice was awesome. I mean, he's basically like, hey, man, you've got costs incurred. Let's go get them. So
yeah, they are a formidable attorney firm. In fact, Rick and John knocked it out of the park. They just got a $135 million verdict from a jury this week on an insurance claim. $135 million verdict. How nice is that?
They're not playing around.
So here's the deal.
Yep.
So here's the deal. Contractor sends in a letter to the insurance company, and the letter is very straightforward. You state fact, 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 fact. Then the contractor sends a letter to the consumer stating fact, 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 fact. The consumer then sends a letter to the insurance company, and they attach the contractor's letter, and the consumer's letter says fact, 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 fact. The insurance company is unable to refute any of the facts. And so the consumer asks a number of questions, and in the letter, they state that the following questions are pertinent. Using that word is important because the Unfair Claim Settlement Practices Act says that the carrier has to answer all pertinent questions within 10 days. So they can't drag their feet and play musical adjusters and have excuse after excuse why they haven't answered the consumer's letter and their questions, because the law requires them to answer all pertinent questions within 10 days. And so, and if you handle it that way, so I conduct an overhead profit class that's an all-day class, obviously, and 30 minutes to an hour visiting with you today, I'm not going to be able to convey all the information that I teach in a 7 to 8 hour class. And so the students that use my 3 letters and they go through the class and say what I tell them to say and do what I tell them to do, the feedback that I get back is, I've had people say that now they're getting overhead and profit on 80 to 90% of the claims they do. And I said, wow, you should be teaching the class if you get those kind of results, right? Because what I hear from contractors out there is anecdotally about 15% of their claims, they're getting overhead and profit before they go to my class. And so, heck, if you were to just double that, that would be a significant increase in legitimate, valid income.
Oh my gosh, that would be huge. Huge. Yeah, and what really boggles my mind is how they try to separate O&P out on certain aspects of the job. When the freeze hit Texas, Miller and I sold a lot of water mitigation work, and we hired a consultant, Clark Brown, to basically teach us step by step how to do water mitigation. He brought in contractors from around the U.S. to do the water mit part. And we are still waiting on overhead and profit for certain things, for water mitigation or pack move or whatever it might be. But it just makes no sense. So the first critical truth is go from talking at the adjusters to asking the right questions. You have in your class very specific questions you teach to use, and be respectful in the way you do it. Be tactful and think long term. The second critical truth is reestablish the playing field, quit playing by their game and their rules. And you're basically saying do that with lump sum contracts. What would you say is the third biggest challenge and issue in blocking guys from getting overhead and profit?
Is that they make the argument verbally and nothing can be verified. So you do, and everyone knows this, is that when you're communicating with an insurance claims department, everything should be in writing. That's the reason why the 3 letters are so critical, is that their correspondence is in writing and it's part of the claim file. So they can't say that they didn't say this or they didn't say that because it's in writing. So everything has to be in writing. And, stop asking for overhead and profit. Stop asking for line items. Why are you asking them for anything? This is the line items. We don't do substandard construction. We don't do mediocrity. We only do construction best practices. Every single line item in our estimate is legitimate and reasonable. If you find an error or you believe some line item is illegitimate or unreasonable, then simple. All you have to do is bring that to our attention and explain how you arrived at that conclusion. Some answer like, we don't pay for that, is not an explanation of how they arrived at the conclusion that that line item is illegitimate or unreasonable. So if a particular line item is illegitimate or unreasonable, then we should strike it. Conversely, if a given line item is legitimate and reasonable, then they should include it, shouldn't they? So how do they justify omitting legitimate and reasonable line items? Either overhead and profit is legitimate or it's not. Of course it is. So how do they justify omitting legitimate line items? So there's going to be pushback. Of course there is. So if you include overhead and profit in a lump sum price, do you know why insurance companies hate a lump sum price rather than line item pricing? They hate it because it puts you in the driver's seat. How can they nitpick your estimate and say, we're not going to pay this price for this, we're not going to pay this price for that, if you don't give them individual pricing? It puts the contractor in the driver's seat. They can no longer nitpick your pricing. They don't even know how much of the lump item, the lump sum price, includes overhead and profit. How do they subtract out overhead and profit if they don't know what that amount is as part of the lump sum? That's why they give you pushback, because they hate lump sum pricing, because you win. You're doing the exact same thing the insurance company does, how they arrive at their price, and the type of pricing that they give their clients, which is a lump sum price.
Yeah, makes total sense. And I mean, no other business operates that way, like you said. But if and also like in our interview with Wally we did several months ago, which you guys listen to this, you can find it on our website. Wally talked a great deal about how they do lump sum contracts, very enlightening. But his whole point was the insurance company doesn't know what my overhead is. They don't know how much I pay in rent at the space that I rent. Whether it's a more rural area or a metropolitan area like Dallas, rents are drastically different. You don't know the size space I rent. You don't know the kind of insurance I have on my company, how much I'm paying in company trucks, iPads, etc. The insurance company has no clue what my overhead is. And you mentioned salesman commissions and so on. And so they don't know what my profit needs to be either. So let's say I think the case is just rock solid for a lump sum contract. But let's say you put that lump sum contract together, you send it in, you've got those letters you're sending in, and they still don't play ball. What then? I mean, are you ready to just take it to appraisal or call an attorney if they just absolutely refuse to play by your rules instead of theirs?
That's where you have the 6 options. You have to memorize those 6 options and understand them so that you can explain them to the consumer. So you go up the chain of authority in the claims department trying to find someone that can be reasoned with. And if no one will be reasonable, then the consumer has those 6 options that I mentioned at the beginning of the show. And so you memorize those options, you explain them to the consumer, and you have them decide what they want to do.
It's good stuff.
See, one of the things is we have to treat every single loss as if it's a retail job and sell financing. So my price is $30,000. The insurance company is at $12,000. So you sell financing for $30,000. Did you know the loss settlement provision of the policy says that they owe the amount that the consumer is paying their contractor? Did you know inside the Xactimate user agreement, Xactimate's own user agreement, they define the ultimate price? And this is what Xactimate says in their user agreement. Ultimately, the definition for the phrase correct price. So Xactimate says, ultimately, the correct price is the price agreed to between the contractor and the consumer. I bet you not one contractor out of 100 knows that inside Xactimate's user agreement, it says that, and it defines the correct price. That's good stuff. Contractors can use that as credible, objective, third-party source material to say that my price is correct. Right there in Xactimate. So do you find Xactimate credible? They can't say no because they use it. And
Right.
if you find it credible, then Xactimate's definition for the correct price must be legitimate, shouldn't it? Again, see, you ask questions. You don't make statements, you ask questions.
No, that's really good. Yeah, in the science or art of persuasion and argument and rhetoric, they call that sawing off the branch that you're sitting on. If they claim that Xactimate is correct, and then Xactimate says that my price is firm, do you agree with Xactimate? And they say no. Well, they just sawed off the branch they're sitting on, and they fall out of the tree, so to speak. So that's great. So what's a parting piece of advice you have for guys dealing with this? I mean, we've given them 3 really good critical truths. One is lead with questions. Number 2 is change the playing field by using a lump sum contract. And then the third thing you mentioned was just really changing the way you deal with the customer as well, and having those questions and keeping everything in writing, which is just it's just a best business practice to keep things professional. What's a parting piece of advice for guys you have to say, okay, this sounds great. What's one thing you want them to take away from all of this?
Make sure you educate the consumer as to what's going on. Because if the consumer is educated and they understand the facts, then you have a consumer that is making the decisions based on all the available information. And so, having the consumer not on your side, having the consumer on their own side. So they're taking up for themselves if they understand that they've prepaid for overhead and profit, you know, they wouldn't accept anything less than that. And so I would encourage, you know, here's my shameless promotion in your interview is if you guys want to pick up overhead and profit, you have to educate yourself somehow on how to do that. And if you don't go to my class, where are you going to go to learn this? Because to my knowledge, I don't know of anyone teaching this besides me. To my knowledge, I'm unaware of anyone teaching this. And so we're conducting a 7 to 8 hour all day class in San Antonio on the 24th of this month. What is today? The 17th?
15th.
15th. I can't even keep up with it. So in 9 days in San Antonio, I'm teaching a class on overhead and profit. The cost of the class is $7.99, 100% money back guarantee. I've never had anyone even hint that they want their money back. The following day, on the 25th, we're doing an all-day appraiser umpire school, where we're teaching you how to be an appraiser or an umpire or both. And that class is $4.95. So if they're interested, they can call me at 214-244-2639. I'll answer any and all questions they have about these upcoming classes, and we can see everyone at the class.
That's so good. Yeah, my last question was going to be, how can people get in touch with you to get your training, and so they can call you? And for guys that thought, oh my gosh, I just missed that, obviously we've got the recording of this. You're going to see the recording of this show inside Level the Playing Field. You're going to see it in our Facebook group, the Limitless Roofing CEO Facebook group. You can just scroll to the end there, and Steve can mention his number. I'll put it in the show notes as well. But I highly recommend reaching out to Steve Patrick. You know, I've said it many times before, but one of the cool things about being a podcast show host is you get to connect with a lot of really neat leaders in the industry, very influential people in the industry. And Steve is one of those guys that I put in the very top of the group of people that I've gotten to get to know. So if you want to learn this stuff, you owe it to yourself to go through that free training and to be equipped. And you can also reach out to Steve through the group. And also it says call Deborah at the number posted in the comment thread. So you can also call Deborah if you want to sign up for that class. If you missed the class, if you're just catching this, 6 months from now by listening to our Limitless Roofing podcast, you can still reach out to Steve. They have ongoing classes all throughout the year, and you will be so glad you did. So Steve, thanks again for joining our show almost a year later from the original episode we did.
You bet. So my number is 214-244-2639.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Steve.
Excellent. Thanks, Dylan. Appreciate you guys.